and they had two towns where they were each destroyed. Remember the recent item that came over Russia, that meteor,
Sure. Yeah.
and it exploded, and it actually it's exploded above around in the middle of about 7 towns, and it exploded at a much higher altitude, and they said it was around 20 times the size of Hiroshima. If it would explode closer to any of those towns, you would have similar effects. Lot during Solomon and Gomorrah, you'd have people vaporized even. And if you look at Lot, when he went around the mountain or town or wall, or whatever he was going around, that they were safe. It's not until she came back around after the second explosion, she was vaporized. And if you look at what the text says, it doesn't say God turned her to a pillar of salt. It's the descriptions of the people who went back to look for her said she was turned. What they saw was a shadow or an outline of her on the stone, just like we see today. You can go to the Hiroshima site and see the shadow of people where they were standing. They were vaporized.
Right.
And the rock was bleached around them, except where their body was, it was still darkened.
Right.
So that's a ancient description of a modern time event, if you want to call it that.
Okay, so we have that event in Sodom and Gomorrah. What other biblical events can you tie this to?
Joseph of Egypt, the drought, the Niebuhr disc in Germany gives us the year and month that it happened for Joseph of Egypt.
Let's talk about that for a second, because one of the things that I gleaned from your book as I was going through it is the fact that there's this time period of 3.5 years of plenty and 3.5 years of drought. Now that 3.5 years, and I want to get into this in the second part of the show, but the 3.5 years plays into this discussion. But what is it about drought that is associated with this event, with this heavenly body?
According to the physics, the stronger force in our universe is not gravity that's ruling our planets. It's electromagnetic in nature. And so we're seeing even Earth's field, electromagnetic field, being affected by some other body. It's moving at 12 times its normal rate in a northerly direction, closer to our geographic north. And that's changing our jet streams, and that's changing our weather patterns and everything. But it's also greatly affecting the sun because of these magnetic fields or problems. So in the past history, we've had areas of 7 years of drought throughout the biblical records as well. And what you have is 3.5 years coming in of drought and 3.5 years as it's leaving. Remember in Revelation, it says when the two prophets arrive or witnesses that they will produce 3.5 years of drought on the world.
Right.
Where they come at the time that it's at its crossing of Earth's path. See, so as it's leaving, you get 3.5 years of drought. And this is the same drought that's during Joseph of Egypt, the same drought that's mentioned in the book of Ruth. There's a drought. There's 3 years of drought at the end of Saul's reign. There's 3 years again of drought at the beginning of David's reign. Now they rounded numbers because they didn't have a word for half, so it was actually 3.5 and 3.5 for the 7th. And we have this multiple times throughout the Bible. Whenever you're looking, if you look for the hallmarks, you can find them. You're looking for drought, earthquakes. You're looking for a double eclipse, which is not normal. You also can look for a tilt or something that's representing a tilt of the earth. I found that the earth is tilted 26 to 28 degrees multiple times.
I was just going to say, you mentioned Joshua, I should say, in your work and his long day. And also another event, I forget where it was. I think it was out of Hosea about a shadow. How do you relate those to this heavenly body?
Yes, if we look at the accounts, let's say, of Hezekiah. Well, Hezekiah gives an example where in the English it says the sundial moved backwards by 10 degrees. Well, when scientifically that means the entire oceans would have covered the continents. But whenever you go back and read the Hebrew, it actually says it moved 10 steps. Well, because of the Niebuhr disc that also tells us that the earth tilted during Joseph's time, as it says in his dream, the skies bowed to him, all right? When he was 16, he had the dream, but when he was 40, it actually occurred, because we can say that by the Niebuhr disc. It says that the Niebuhr disc qualifies it, that's 26 to 28 degree tilt. We also have that in Hezekiah. When you take, instead of a viewpoint from east to west, like on a sundial, and you change that from north to south, and that it was steps, the shadow moved on up and down 10 steps of a stairway facing south. You have exactly 26 to 28 degrees again. And then that would make much more sense in a model, and we can prove that out in a model. When the tail of this object also has a tail similar to a comet. So the best way to describe this is a planet/comet, like a half breed of both. Well, when it gets between us and the sun, that means the tail is pointing at us, because the tail always points opposite of the sun. and Earth enters into the tail, which is from the physics point of view, the tail is plasma. In the astronomy point of view, the tail is ice particles. Well, if it's ice particles, then we'll have no effect. But if it's plasma, as Earth is entering, you get an effect of Earth's rotation slowing down because the energy going into the North and South Pole will be reduced by 4.5 to 5.5%, compounded hourly, and it takes about 28 to 24 hours for Earth to come to a complete stop, as the text says in the long day of Joshua. And this model proves out. I brought the model to a physics professor. He took a few minutes to look at it, and he stated that I was the first one to ever explain this logically. We have a logical model, the eyewitness accounts of what they're showing. And there's other texts outside the Bible, which I still have to get my hands on, that's mentioned by Chuck Messler, as well as Emmanuel Velikovsky, that states that during this time period of Joshua's long day, him and his men saw an object 50 times larger than the moon. Again, when we use the same calculations, you put an object roughly 7 times the diameter of Earth halfway between the moon and Earth, you get a viewpoint from Earth of 50 to 1.
Right. Now, we're about 2 minutes from break, so what I want to do on the other side of the break is to begin to talk about some of the other evidence about Planet 7X, and then delve into some of the more technical and scientific issues regarding this. But audience, what we're trying to do is to build a foundation for you so that you understand why Mr. Broussard thinks the way he thinks. So with that, Gill, we have about 1.5 minutes before break. Are there any other biblical references that you want to briefly mention?
Well, there's another one of Jonah, Nineveh. Remember, Yeshua tells us that we'll have a sign in a wicked and adulterous generation. We'll only have one sign. And we read about the time about him being in whale, but there's only 2 pages to Jonah. And what caught my attention to Jonah when he went to Nineveh, he didn't perform a single miracle.
But he said you have 40 days to repent, is what he told.
Yes, he has 40 days. Well, the model shows us the only thing you have to do is point to the sky. And this is going to be a repeat event in the near future that the government will tell the public about in 40 days, that this is a threat.
Well, that's, audience, that's very interesting. I've said before that we have been prepped by the media, by the entertainment industry, and by our own government for some of the events that we see in science fiction movies today and regarding meteor impacts and that kind of thing. So I think Gill is spot on this. So we're going to delve deeper into this discussion and some of the other evidence that points to this heavenly body, Planet 7X, after this break. We'll be right back. Welcome back, audience. You are listening to Prepare the Way, and I'm your host, Daniel Holdings, with my very special guest, Gill Broussard, who is an independent researcher looking into the Planet X phenomenon, and he was gracious enough to be with us this evening. We are talking about all things Planet X, including, if you missed the first hour, some biblical references. You're going to have to catch that on the podcast in order to catch up, because there is very, very important information that will help you to understand the basics of this discussion and the reason why our guest thinks that we are about ready to be walloped once again by Planet 7X. So with that said, I need to remind you that this is a pre-recorded show, so therefore the phone lines aren't open. So as we get back into this discussion, we spent the first half hour giving a general overview of Planet X, what the theory was behind it, other thoughts on it, and also went into some biblical reference why you believe that it is in fact a real phenomenon. You also mentioned that you thought it was a 360-year orbit around our sun, as opposed to some of the longer 3,600-year orbits, that sort of thing. And that you mentioned bore out by the evidence the biblical evidence that you brought up. Now, what I'd like to do at the beginning of this half hour is to talk a little bit about other anecdotal evidence, perhaps not necessarily anecdotal, but evidence like non-biblical texts. You mentioned something in your book called the sky disk. What is it, and why is it important?
Well, the sky disk is an ancient artifact found in Germany, and it's the oldest recorded pattern of the sky in Europe that we can find. I don't go along with the museum take on their description of it as far as the patterns and the dates. They list the Bronze Age, but when you take a close look at it, at some other areas, they had it's a bronze disc that shows some gold inlay patterns stars, the sun, the moon, and the Messier horizon. It's only about 12 inches or so across. What I noticed was that the moon was facing the opposite way, that side, not facing the sun, which the expert opinions did not catch. Two, that they were saying that it was an eclipse as a normal eclipse because the moon is shown to the right of it. It has to be a third object because the moon is shown in a crescent shape. You can only have an eclipse if it's a new moon, which is a full circle. And what's interesting about this mainly is that from their latitude, they're not able to see the constellation Messier Orion in the month of March as this constellation, as this pattern is framing. It's framing the constellation to the right, which is Capricorn, and the constellation to the left as Gemini. Then whatever patterns are in between, they are stating it. But that gives you the month March during the time period of 1794. And then what they could not see from that latitude was the constellation Orion, which is shown on the disk, unless the Earth tilted 26 to 28 degrees, and you had the viewpoint of the latitude of Luxor, Egypt, to be able to see this. And this object was created as well as found in Germany because the material finds of the object itself when it went to the laboratory showed that it was mined from the local regions.
Okay, so we have this, and audience, I apologize, we're having some technical issues with Mr. Broussard's conversation here, but you can glean what he is saying. And again, please go to danielholdings.com. You can look at his book for yourself as you're following this discussion, because what he just said, he actually says in his book, so you'll be able to follow it. Now, and by the way, I should say, audience, that book is free. Mr. Broussard has put his time and effort into this work and made it available for free to the public at large because it's that important. He wants to get that information out. Excuse me. So, all right. So we have this disc. Now, is it me, Gill, or does that sound like there was a polar shift? And for our audience's benefit, what is a polar shift?
Exactly that it refers that the poles have shifted to some degree. There's many people that take that and say it's 180 degrees. But there isn't any real hard evidence that it shifted 180 degrees because they're getting this from ancient texts. And it's from a viewpoint of Earth. And if someone would have seen stars from the Messier horizon move to where it's above them, which is like 26 to 28 degrees, the words that they would have said that they would thought the Earth is flipped, okay, but not 180 degrees. It's from their viewpoint on Earth. So it still matches the 26 to 28 degree tilt that's been mentioned. It's just the way you interpret text.
Right. And, one of the things I always say, audience, and you've heard me say this, it's in my books as well, that how would ancient peoples describe events that we have science to describe now? They would describe it such as the stars bowed down, the sky was torn like a scroll, unfolded like a scroll. So these are the terms that ancient peoples use, and that's where we get these descriptions. Now, what exactly is a polar shift? Because there's such things as crustal displacement, and there's also a magnetic shift, but this isn't a magnetic shift. And what's the difference between the two, Gill?
Yes, magnetic poles are different from our geographic poles. We claim that the Earth had a magnetic shift several times, but going back, again, tracing back the original source of the data was a gentleman that made the sketch that he put plus and minus marks. And what his original intent was that it was more or less strong of its normal fields. Not that it was a reversal of the fields, but that it was less than or equal more than the present magnetic field strength. Now this one gets into the wrong hands, say, oh, the field's reversed, look, minus and plus. But that's not what his original intention was. So that's how the whole 9 yards of 180 degree flipping of the magnetic poles come about. But I don't think there's real hard evidence to that unless you're looking at lava. Lava flows in any direction, and it freezes in whatever its orientation as lava was made. So therefore you can have different directions. So I'm not quite sure if the magnetic field is actually flipped as they claim. It might have, but I'm not real sure. Most evidence is referring to this interpreter, the scientist, and he said he wished he never created the drawing because it's a misinterpretation. And the physical can document that 3 or 4 times in where when this object gets close enough, they like two magnetic bar magnets. The opposite poles attract to each other, and they're going to tilt. The Earth will tilt towards it. 26 to 28 degrees has been the common pole shift, if you wish to call it, or tilt